Hello. Welcome to Season XV of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, we're watching movies from the 90s and talking about how they fit into the larger picture of 90s horror and how each year from that decade stacks up against the others. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Nothing like that New Year from the 90s smell.
You say that again, man.
We're back. This week we are kicking off our 2-week series on horror movies from 1993. And this season we're going through each year of the 90s and picking two movies that are not sequels or remakes that we haven't talked about before and that were made on a budget of less than $100 million. Before we get into the one that we did watch this week, I wanted to talk about some movies that we did not want to talk about this week because they didn't match the criteria. Those movies are Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, Return of the Living Dead 3, The Mummy Lives, Amityville: A New Generation, When a Stranger Calls Back, and Puppet Master 4. That's a lot of sequels. That's a lot of horror sequels in one year, but it's actually like a lot fewer than the last couple.
Yeah.
So maybe it's starting to wind down a little bit, but I definitely kind of coming into this season, the idea was the 90s have a reputation of just being kind of like knockoff horror sequels and not a lot of like good new horror ideas. And we wanted to prove that wrong. But maybe what we're proving is the 90s was a bunch of low-quality knockoff horror sequels and a few good ideas.
Maybe it was that way for a reason.
Yeah, right. But one thing I did want to talk to you now that we're in 1993, I feel like I have to bring up The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah.
Because I feel like fans of horror movies are probably well acquainted with it. I would guess that you and I have very different opinions on it.
It's a musical, so you don't like it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What do you think of The Nightmare Before Christmas?
Oh, yeah. Just like every decent human being out there, I think it's a good film. No, we enjoy it. I've watched it since a kid, so like it's just been like a mainstay, and the struggle every year is like, is this one we watch during Halloween or Christmas or both? And it's generally one we do during both.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I was raised in a household where I was not allowed to watch such things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I did not see The Nightmare Before Christmas until I was in college. And I don't like musicals, which are all the things that go into the recipe for making a person not care whatsoever about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like a lot of people have a very, very strong connection to it.
I see that.
And maybe some of that is just like the nostalgia factor of like it being like kind of weird and like maybe a thing that you felt like was part of, like you were getting away with something around the holidays.
Mm-hmm. I think it was also just like it was something new and different,
Yeah.
Like talk about like the design of it and everything. And I think that's like the aesthetics of the show itself, I think is what, especially now, like I don't understand. I feel like that's life for some people. Like they love the stuff, The Nightmare Before Christmas that much.
Yeah.
That it's like, this is like almost like a lifestyle decision or something. But which is definitely not the case for us, but like it's one where it's like, it's not a bad story, bad message. I just don't know if it's a Halloween or if it's a Christmas film. That's my main beef.
Pick a lane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, not my cup of tea, but also kind of that horror imagery, Halloween-ish stuff is all pretty compatible with a lot of things that I like. So I have a hard time, like I hold nothing against people that are into it. It's just not my thing. So
right. Yeah.
That is a movie that we could have maybe talked about for this year, but I know that I don't like it. And so it's not going to benefit anybody for me to just complain about it. So we decided to go.
At least I watched Man Bites Dog.
Yeah, that's true. I had to watch that too. I also didn't enjoy it just because I picked it off of a list of things that I read about. Yeah, anyway. But this week we're doing a movie from 1993 that is not The Nightmare Before Christmas. We are doing the movie Doppelganger.
Doppelganger.
And I didn't know anything about it until I was looking at a list of horror movies from 1993, and it really reminded me of that episode. The description of it reminded me of that episode of The Twilight Zone that we talked about, where the woman is at the bus station and she has like her double there, and it was the one that was the inspiration for Us.
Yeah,
and because of that, I'm like, oh, this is intriguing. I want to see like the movie adaptation of that same idea, and I'm like, oh, Drew Barrymore's in it. I have never heard of this. That's kind of crazy. Let's check it out. And so this one had a young Drew Barrymore. And also, I was surprised to see Danny Trejo in the early 90s, but he still kind of looked old somehow.
He looks the same age, just old.
Just same dude all this time.
You know what's funny is I didn't realize it was... I'm telling you, man, like I was going into these blind, you know, and it worked the past 2 weeks. That's all I'm saying. But but like I didn't even realize it was Drew Barrymore at the beginning. I was like, that definitely looks. Oh, it is Drew Barrymore. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, that's familiar.
Yeah, it's like, oh wow, no idea. I had no idea that she was in it.
Yeah, and she's such a big star now that it's kind of weird that like I have never heard anybody talk about this movie. So
yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we're going to get into the how many different subgenres can you fit into the same horror movie details.
Perfect.
In 1993, ITC Entertainment Group brought us Doppelganger, a subgenre spanning horror film written and directed by Avi Nesher. Doppelganger tells the story of a woman played by Drew Barrymore who moves across the country for a fresh start, only to find out that her past isn't so easy to escape. Her unsuspecting writer roommate is in for a wild ride as things go from creepy to dangerous to downright supernatural. This movie was made on a budget of $7 million and doesn't seem to have much of an online presence, and I couldn't find box office numbers. It can, however, be streamed for free with ads on Tubi.
Do you think Drew Barrymore's like her people that work for her has just like put in decades of time spent hiding this film, like
just from scrubbing it from the internet?
Just trying to make it where people don't know she's in it.
So maybe, because when I was looking for any information at all, basically all I could find were like super negative reviews, and I'm not gonna lie, I was surprised by that because I did not hate this movie at all. Yeah,
I didn't think it was as bad as the ratings for sure. Yeah.
This one kept my attention way better than the last two that we watched.
Really?
So yeah, maybe like I could see from like a publicity perspective, they're like, hey, we don't want Drew's name out there associated with all these like sub 5 out of 10 ratings.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I like you, I went into this without really knowing anything about it other than just kind of the brief blurb, and I didn't know what to expect, but I just assumed it was going to be rough. And I'm not saying that this is a great movie as far as like a storytelling perspective, because it was kind of all over the place and I feel like had a lot of plot holes, but it was at least interesting and it kept my attention way better than a lot of other movies that we've watched.
Well, see, and like I was saying last week with like, this kind of reminded me of like a 60s style film. This one had the same for me as well, where it was almost like a modern twist to a 60s style film. Could be the tie to the Twilight Zone for sure, but like I guess maybe like the detective work and or not the detective work, but the detective work that the viewers having to do to try to figure out like who's behind what, I think is kind of the piece that reminded me of it. And I think that tied in with the fact that this is an early 90s film is what did it for me, where I'm like, this isn't that bad. Like, before we started recording, I was like, well, I didn't hate this one, kind of prepping where I was going with it when we start recording. And I thought I had to prepare you, like, just so you know, I actually kind of liked it. Yeah. The relief I had when you said you did too, I was like, okay, thank God. Okay, here we go. We're good.
Don't have to defend it. We can just talk about the stuff we like. Yeah,
right. There are weird things in this that, like, it's where it's almost like watching a cartoon. You're like, I can't believe that they're adding that in, and it's like, yeah, but we're also watching a film about a talking turtle, or whatever the case is. It's like like that's where we're gonna say. Right. That's kind of like what it was a little bit with this, where it's like, I can't believe she decided to stay with that roommate.
Yeah. Right.
When he was like, oh, I had 2 rooms. Like, that's, but then also it's like, I can't believe he let her stay there after, like, the way, so there were definitely weird pieces like that. And once you got beyond that, almost like for me with the Lawnmower Man, once I got past, like, the confusion and bad technology shots that they made, like, yeah, it's not too bad. That's how I felt about Doppelganger too.
The thing that makes this one stand out to me is that it started with some very effective, very intense scenes. And then there were kind of like the dream sequences throughout where things got really crazy and gnarly. And then it would just cut back to normal. And it's like, okay, that didn't actually happen. But that kind of kept you, like, on your toes, because you were always trying to figure out, like, is this real or is this some kind of, like, illusion? But then there were also all the twists in the story and the investigation piece as well. And so there was, like, enough, I guess, horror elements to keep me interested, and then enough story elements to keep me thinking about it in between. And that made for a viewing experience where I didn't really feel like there was time where it was just boring and I wanted to zone out. And so, like, the very beginning of the movie, there's, like, that opening sex scene, but the music was really intense, like horror music, not like sex music. And then you see the reflection in the guy's glasses, and she's, like, turned into that alien monster or whatever. And then it just immediately cuts away from that. And then it's her, like, brutally murdering her mom in a scene that I was writing in my notes, like, oh, this is very reminiscent of what we would see a lot in Scream, which she was also in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was cool to me just because that beginning part, it took different elements, but the brutality of it was so intense that you couldn't walk away from that and not think that this movie is going to keep delivering on that level. And so then that adds that, like, base layer of anxiety for everything else that's happening, because you know that the movie is prepared to go there. It's not like everything's just boring until it ramps up at the end. It's, okay, there's clear danger, and it will be present through every step of the film.
And that's one of the reasons why we like it when they go big at the beginning, because there's definitely got to be a lull period. And if they didn't go big at the beginning with this one, then I think my opinion would have definitely been different of this film, because you didn't know what you're getting yourself into. And by, halfway in, you're just like, what am I watching? This is like, you don't understand the intensity that the film has to offer. So kudos to the makers for doing that as well.
Yeah.
Adds on to it.
Yes. And I think that the story aspect contributed a lot too, in that there was, like, very clearly a mystery. It's not just like Pierce Brosnan is doing experiments on the lawn guy and seeing him progressively get smarter and more dangerous, where it's just kind of like this a story arc where you know what's happening. This is like, oh, who's lying? Who's telling the truth? Why is there a random FBI agent with a really weird accent in the apartment complex? And he's saying, that she has these motivations for doing things, and she says that she has a double, but he's saying that she has multiple personalities, and who's right? And it's just all of this stuff to try and untangle and to try and piece together and use clues from the movie. And then mix that in with all of these, like, all of a sudden she's, like, crucified to the wall, when the roommate comes home and he's trying to help her, and then her doppelganger comes out and stabs him, and you're like, well, the doppelganger definitely exists, and now the roommate's gone. What's going to happen next? And then like that was a dream, and then you're just like, I don't even know what to believe anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was the part where it kept that intensity level, and it kept introducing new like elements of like mystery to the story, so that I don't know, it was just nice that I didn't have to sit through parts of the movie that weren't there for no reason, or that were there just to fill space.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, with this film, like, you also had to have those just for the mystery aspect alone so otherwise, first off, I don't know exactly what happened throughout the film, and which is kind of my fault for sure. However, like, there were definitely confusing pieces throughout this whole film, but adding the dream sequence is like, okay, well, at least that's confusing pieces on purpose.
Yes.
And so then in my Neanderthal brain, like, now it's allowed. Like, now I can like this film because, oh, they did that on purpose. Whereas the last three things I had questions about were not. That was just bad filmmaking decisions.
Yeah, and I think this one was also really interesting, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, just in that I feel like it really mixed a lot of different horror subgenres, because there were definitely elements of slasher in this one. It was definitely very psychological, but then also kind of like monster/body horror at the end.
Yeah,
I mean, there were some pretty gnarly. That last scene with her like splitting into the two parts and one of them attacking, like, that was some pretty intense practical effect, like nasty body horror that went down right there.
Right.
And I was not expecting that at all based on how the movie had gone up until that point.
Yeah, no. Zero expectation of that. Like, up until then, I thought it was like just a psychotic person, or she was psychotic that was doing it, And then next thing you know, you're sitting there trying to figure out, like, what is this worm thing that's happening here?
Well, earlier you're like, why is the turtle talking? I thought you were talking about like this character at the end.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
I missed the illusion that you were making at first. But no, completely unidentifiable. But I also cannot confidently explain what was happening with the plot. Like, because there was that twist where I guess her psychologist had been following her whole life and dressing up as other people to control her somehow.
Yeah.
And had convinced her other personality to kill the mother. So she did have multiple personalities, but also was like possessed by some sort of double worm monster thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all, but it was an intriguing horror movie watching experience. We didn't come here for the plot on this one.
No. And if you do come here for the plot, then you're in the wrong decade, apparently. For what we're figuring out.
If you're hungry for plot, why don't you go watch Jason Goes to Hell the Final Friday? Okay. Yeah. If that's what you're doing in 1993. Watch Amityville, A New Generation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think though that does have something to say. Maybe us doing the Twilight Zone season was more beneficial to this decade than what we initially thought, because the last two for sure had those direct influences.
Yeah, definitely.
For it. So, shout out to the Twilight Zone for being the OG, for sure. But, as far as this one goes, I'll say, like, for me specifically, it was a lot like with the Lawnmower Man, where like bits and pieces of it, you're just like, I have no idea what the frick is going on. But then, give it another few minutes and it's okay. You don't need to know. Like, it's fine. Just keep going. The movie continues. The confusion continues. But at least there's some pretty gnarly, horror scenes in this. like when he comes back and the apartment's kind of tore up and he's kind of like following the blood drippings to the back, you know, and it's like, that's the start of something crazy, man. Like, and also just like, I don't care if you own that house or apartment, just call the cops.
Yeah.
You know, I open my door and it's tore up like that. I'm just calling the cops immediately. They'll say, was anyone in the house? They'll say, I don't know, dumbass. I called you as soon as I saw this.
Right. The thing that was kind of funny to me about it is like he gets back home and the apartment complex is a crime scene. And all he has to say is, oh, I live here. And the cops are just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a fine. Got another.
But yeah. So if you ever need to, if there's ever a crime scene blocking your way to a place you need to go, just say, hey guys, it's okay. I live here. And clearly the police will get out of the way and just let you walk right through.
Exactly.
I learned it from the movies.
Yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, the dad was the killer too. I have no idea actually what happened.
It was her psychologist.
Oh, it was the psychologist. That's right. That's right. My bad.
I also thought it was the dad.
That was dressing up like the... Yeah. That's my bad. See what I mean? I enjoy the film. I still don't 100% know what happened. Right. I legit watched it again last night. No idea. Just kind of kept going with it.
Yeah, it is in the back of my mind that if I have time, I may watch this one again sometime soon-ish while it's still fresh, just because I think a lot of the story might make more sense.
Yeah, I think so.
If I can at least go back to it, having seen it once. But I also kind of don't want to just read the Wikipedia page because I feel like a lot of times they inject a bunch of stuff that isn't actually in the movie. It's like context from talking to the director or something.
Right.
And I think I'd rather try and figure this one out on my own. But
yeah, inadvertently I did that, man. And I'm telling you, my opinion was totally different. And like, I think the research piece for me is what kind of hurts some of these films in a way. Cause like, I already have it figured out in my head and I'm too big of a Neanderthal to think otherwise. So I was doing just fine watching them.
Well, this one, like I said, it was kind of a pleasant surprise to me. I feel like the last two were kind of duds. And so it was nice that this one held up a little bit better. I don't think it was a perfect movie by any means. I mean, there was some rough acting, but I feel like the visual effects were pretty good and pretty like disturbing. Like they did what they needed to do for a horror movie to be effective. And so the pacing was good. I feel like they used music well. They did some cool stuff with the visual effects. And it was obviously an interesting story. It kept you engaged throughout. So definitely a good entry into the list for 1993, and then we're going to come back next week with another movie from 1993 and then see how it stacks up against the others from this decade.
Yep. I'm interested to see how this one, last decade actually took a lot out of me, or it hurt me to rate it where we had to. It was
1992?
Yeah, 1992 was a different, it's a decade. The last year was a little bit difficult for me. I thought it was more difficult than I initially thought going into that episode. Yeah.
Off to a strong start. I have one question to ask you before we're done with this episode, but did you have anything else to go over?
I did not.
Okay. Now, in this movie, there were a number of characters that Patrick, the writer, interacted with.
Yeah.
And we later found out that those characters were all the psychologist in disguise, right?
Right.
Do you remember the scene where Patrick hooks up with the doppelganger?
Oh.
And then the next day, Holly tells him that it wasn't her, that it was this doppelganger that's been following her whole life?
Oh.
Who did Patrick sleep with?
I thought that was no, I'm not even going to say my idea, just to let this dream keep going. I don't know. He slept with that dude.
The final mystery.
It was solved right here, man. They're like, what's the proof? There's none. We just know.
I'm going to edit the Wikipedia page.
You should.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.